Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another Friday review. Today I am here to review Dying of Everything, which is the brand new 11th studio album from the original death metal leaders Obituary, released on January 13th via Relapse Records. So, without further ado, let's begin, shall we? Okay, now, before I get into my thoughts on Dying of Everything, you know what I have to do. I have to do a track listing rundown so I can tell you folks what are the songs are on this album, how many tracks are on this album, and what is the time length for this album. Since this consists a total of 10 tracks, it clocks in at the length of 44 minutes and 57 seconds. So, these 10 tracks are, beginning with Barely Alive, The Wrong Time, Without a Conscience, War, the title track, My Will to Live, By the Dawn, Weaponize the Hate, Torn Apart, and then finally ending with Be Warned. So there you go, folks. There's your 10 tracks. Yep, it's time to read from my notes, everybody, because I've written down plenty of my thoughts here. Now, I must confess here, as much as I've been an avid listener of classic, old-school death metal, with some of my favorites being Morbid Angel, Death, Sinister, Deicide, Bolt Thrower, and well, etc. and etc. However, I wasn't as familiar with a lot of Obituary's discography. I know how important the band is to the genre and, of course, to the whole Florida scene. The only album of Obituary that I was ever somewhat familiar with was their debut album, Slowly We Rot. But anything afterwards, total blank spots. This is all due to the fact that my brother, who, for years, was only a fan of Slowly We Rot, and the albums afterwards, even including Cause of Death, left him completely cold. So in a way, that left an everlasting impression on me, and so because of that, I never dove into Obituary. And in some cases, I kind of have to apologize for that. So, because of this, this probably makes me not a true death metal fan. But recently, I ran into a brick wall on trying to find an album to listen to so I can review it, here on the channel. Since I began noticing a lot of people on YouTube reviewing and even hyping up Obituary's newest effort, I suddenly felt the itch to finally sit down and dive into the sacred lands that is Obituary's discography. Now, before I even took a crack at Dying of Everything, pretty much all of last week I was listening to nothing but Obituary. I was already familiar with the classic debut, but the rest I wasn't, and my impressions of their albums varied from good, decent, to absolutely fucking dreadful. I'm looking at you, World Demise, you goddamn piece of shit. So after binge listening to all of Obituary's albums, I was finally fully ready to take a crack at Dying of Everything. So, here I go. Here are my thoughts. Compared to the previous albums from Obituary, this isn't really treading new ground. However, thankfully, there are no stop and go shit like what I was treated to on World Demise. Now, with that out of the way, the thing that I noticed with this band is that their approach to death metal was much more different than from the likes of Deicide, even Morbid Angel, Cannibal Corpse, and Death. Is that Obituary attacks it from a groove filter, then you're standing tossing your lifeless corpse into a meat grinder philosophy that most of them pretty much went by. Now, that doesn't mean Obituary aren't capable of providing fast death metal songs, because there are some to be found here, in a way that kind of harkens back to the sound of their classic debut, Solar Rerot. I mean, this album kicks right off with one of their most punishing numbers to date with Barely Alive, an instant standout track for me, with Donald Hardy giving his most uncompromising, relentless performance to date. And of course, the seminal title track is also another soul crusher, packs in more of a thrashier punch than compared to all the, again, to the all-out death metal salt of the album opener. But then there are some songs that, you know, mixes up the pacing, something that isn't all that new to Obituary. Take, for example, like the 3 middle songs from the second half of this album, with, of course, By the Dawn, Weaponized Hate, and Torn Apart. Is that they have that crushing drive of the more fast songs, but the tempos are toned down a notch. And the tempos within these songs will change. Sometimes it will be semi-fast with a lot of that, again, Donald Hardy's very fast double drum kick pacing. But then for a second, we'll switch into a slower groove pace like direction that pretty much keeps Obituary in the same lane that they've been in since the 90s. With, of course, some of the albums I already just kind of forgot. I had a little slight blank there, but the one that's, I think, coming to my mind is The Incomplete. There. I hate it when all of a sudden I blink like that. Shit. Then, of course, we have the more slow, mid-paced groove songs that they've been churning out since. So, to me, the best of these kind of tracks are War and My Will to Live. Again, both are mid-paced, but the riffs are pretty fucking cool. There is more of a boost in energy than compared to the stuff that I heard on previous albums, where it just seemed like the band was sounding tired and bored. So thankfully they've been sounding more alive, especially on this album and of course the self-titled album from 2017, which again, this preceded. The album here, of course, ends with probably their slowest to date in Be Warned. It's slow, but in more of a death doom kind of way. Think more like Mental Funeral era Autopsy. With John Hardy at times giving his most guttural vocal performance that I've heard so far. The only song on here, though, that I don't necessarily care for is Without a Conscience. It just comes across as average and repetitive, especially in the lyric department. So finally, to wrap up my thoughts on Obituary's brand new studio effort, it's a solid, enjoyable album. Again, more live sounding than compared to the likes of Darkest Day, and of course, more inspired than Executioner's Return. And it's just more of a solid effort than, in my opinion, than Inked in Blood. And thankfully, not as obnoxious as World Demise. However, it still doesn't beat Solar Rerot. Nothing does. But all in all, it's a very enjoyable album and probably a notch better than their previous album, again from 2017, the self-titled album. So there you go, folks. There's my overall thoughts on Dying of Everything from Obituary. And my score for this album, again, the rating, I'm giving it a 8.50 out of 10. Again, not all of this album to me is perfect, but maybe, of course, it's probably perfect to a lot of the core, die-hard Obituary fans. But that's fine. That's great. I'm kind of like that with some of my absolute favorite bands. So again, it's just a very biased kind of standpoint. You know, it's a very biased outlook on things. But for me, who, again, I do enjoy what I've heard from Obituary, some great stuff to be found, and then, again, in their discography. But again, not everything is perfect to my ears, but again, this is probably as close as you're probably going to get to a really good Obituary album, and a great one at times too, especially when it comes to, you know, in mind of their most recent efforts. It's a very good album and probably ranks up there as obviously one of their better albums. It's a really solid album, and it probably does kind of put in contention for really probably one of the best albums of 2023 so far. So, with that, if you're one of those who have checked out Dying of Everything, and again, and are a big Obituary fan, again, you can leave your thoughts in the comment section below, and again, if they are positive or negative, again, you can leave them. But if you've never checked out Dying of Everything and you're kind of wondering, especially if you're just one of those who never kept up with a lot of Obituary stuff and are kind of are on the fence of whether or not this might be a very good, enjoyable listen, or, you know, if it might do anything for you, then all I'm going to say is give it a chance. It's, I think, a pretty solid album from Obituary, and obviously I think you may not be completely disappointed. There might be some parts you might be disappointed with, or there's probably going to be a lot of parts in this where you actually will be very surprised by. So with that, I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrash saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.